On our third wedding anniversary, I made a pot of burgundy red wine beef stew. I had simmered it over low heat for 3 hours, letting the rich aroma of wine and beef blend together and fill the whole villa. It was Ethan Goo's favorite dish, and it was also the only thing I had kept after marrying him that still belonged to the traces of who Claire Chin once was. The dining table was covered with a neatly ironed linen cloth, set with the bamboo candle holders he liked, and 2 tall wine glasses. The Romane Conti resting in the decanter was releasing a mature fruity fragrance. I looked out at the deep night beyond the window. The antique Zhongxi clock on the wall was already pointing to 11. The food had long gone cold, and so had my heart. From the entryway came the soft beep of the password lock, followed by heavy footsteps. I didn't turn my head. I simply watched the flames of the candles dance quietly. A strong smell of alcohol drifted over, mixed with a faint, almost elusive trace of perfume. It was L'Air Bleu by Guerlain. Its top notes of iris and violet were cool and distant. Ironically, I had personally given it to him last month as a gift for Vivian Wen's birthday. "You're still up?" Ethan's voice carried a hint of fatigue, along with a touch of impatience that was hard to detect. I didn't answer. I only picked up my knife and fork and slowly cut into the steak in front of me that had long since lost all warmth. The reddish juice seeped out slightly like a wound that refused to heal. "Claire, we need to talk." He walked over and sat down across from me. He didn't spare a single glance at the table I had painstakingly prepared. Instead, he took a document out of his briefcase and pushed it toward me. Black text on white paper, the title striking in cold. "Divorce agreement." My hand paused. The knife and fork scraped against the white porcelain plate with a sharp, jarring sound. I lifted my head, and for the first time in the middle of the night, truly looked at the man I had loved for 5 years. He was wearing an expensive handmade suit, his features sharp and handsome, but the eyes that had once looked at me with warmth and affection now held only icy rationality and a trace of guilt. "Why?" I asked. My voice was so calm that even I was surprised. "Vivian, something happened to her." Ethan avoided my eyes and looked out the window. To help my company secure investment from Starcrest Technologies, she was targeted by a competitor. They retaliated and rammed into her car. Her leg was injured. The doctor said she might have lasting complications. I looked at him, at the perfectly measured expression of pain and struggle on his face, and felt a cold stillness settle deep in my chest. How familiar this script was, how clumsy this excuse. "So," I asked softly, "I can't let her down." He finally looked directly at me, his eyes carrying a pleading weight, as if urging me to be understanding. "Claire, you've always been the sensible one. The company is at a critical point. I can't lose this investment. Vivian's father is one of Starcrest's shareholders. I have to give him an explanation." "And your explanation is to divorce me?" I smiled faintly, though the smile never reached my eyes. "As for the finances, don't worry." He seemed to breathe easier, slipping into the part he was best at, negotiation. "This villa will be yours. You can choose any car you want from the garage, and I'll give you another $50 million in cash. It's enough for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life." He sounded like a benevolent monarch granting favors to a subject he was about to discard. He was certain that I, a woman with no parents, no background, a housewife who had relied entirely on him, would be grateful for such a fortune. For 3 years, I had played the perfect wife he imagined, gentle, obedient, never asking questions about his business. My days revolved around arranging flowers, cooking, and waiting for him to come home. He thought he had married someone simple. He had never realized that the woman he thought needed his protection was the same person who had sent him, anonymously, those countless early warning analysis reports whenever his business empire faced a crisis. I picked up the agreement and flipped to the last page, leaving the marriage with nothing. It clearly stated that I, Claire Chin, voluntarily gave up all marital assets, including company shares. The villa and the $50 million he had mentioned earlier were nothing but empty words meant to soothe me. "Claire, let me explain." He noticed the change in my expression and seemed to want to say something, but I raised my hand and stopped him. "There's no point." I had spent 3 years gambling on a pure love, unburdened by the halo of a billionaire's daughter. Now it seemed I had lost, and lost completely. I stood up and walked into the study. I took out my pen, a Mont Blanc Little Prince edition, engraved with a line in French. What is essential is invisible to the eye. When I returned to the dining table, under Ethan's stunned gaze, I signed my name at the bottom of the agreement. Claire Chin. My handwriting was calm and steady, without the slightest tremor. Good. He exhaled with relief and reached out to take the agreement, but I pressed my hand on it and stopped him. Ethan Gu. I looked at him and said each word clearly. You will regret this. Then I released my hand, turned around and went upstairs. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I was as composed as if I were handling a document that had nothing to do with me. Because I knew that from this moment on, the naive woman who believed she could exchange self-sacrifice for love, that version of Claire Chin, was dead. And next, it was time for Claire Chin, managing director of Skylark Capital, to take the stage. The next day, I received a call from Ethan's assistant, asking me to come to the company to finalize the last of the handover procedures. When I arrived downstairs at his office building, I happened to see Vivian Wen being carefully helped out of the car by Ethan and settled into a wheelchair. Her left leg was in a cast, her face pale, leaning pitifully in Ethan's arms like a delicate white flower battered by wind and rain. Employees nearby whispered while looking at them, their eyes full of sympathy and admiration. In their eyes, Ethan was a loyal, devoted man who abandoned his wife for the sake of the woman injured because of him. Noble and affectionate. Wearing sunglasses, I stood quietly in a corner of the lobby, watching this touching performance. In Ethan's office, Vivian had already taken over his boss chair, directing the assistants to remove every trace of me. When she saw me walk in, a glint of triumph and provocation flashed in her eyes before she quickly replaced it with an innocent expression. Claire, I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't mean for this to happen between us. Shut up. I cut her off coldly. She froze, clearly not expecting the woman who had always seemed so gentle to speak to her that way. Ethan frowned and walked over to shield her behind him. Claire, don't be like this. Vivian isn't feeling well. I couldn't be bothered to respond. I walked straight to the desk and signed each of the documents that required my signature. Just as I was about to leave, Vivian's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, then deliberately pressed the speaker button and began speaking in clumsy French. I knew she was doing it on purpose. She had graduated from a mediocre university with a French major. This was one of the few things she could use to show off in front of Ethan. On the phone, it sounded like one of her friends. She used an exaggerated tone, complaining in French about her injured leg. Then, as if by accident, she mentioned me, her words dripping with contempt, as she said I was nothing more than a housewife who couldn't even understand French and would soon be kicked out the door. Ethan didn't understand any of it. He only looked at her dotingly, his eyes full of admiration. And I simply stood by the doorway, listening quietly. Chinese might be my native language, but French was the language I used to think, to work, to live. This woman, showing off her broken, awkward French in front of someone who graduated from the Sorbonne and drank coffee under the plane trees on the Champs-Élysées for 4 years, was the funniest joke in the world. After she hung up, Vivian looked at me provocatively, as if waiting for me to lose my temper or fall apart. Instead, I let the corner of my lips curve slightly, reached into my bag and took out an envelope, placing it on Ethan's desk. It was plain white, with no writing on it, only a hand-drawn sycamore leaf in the lower right corner, its veins sketched in delicate, clear lines. It was a symbol of Paris, and the last clue I was leaving for him, or rather, for the future version of him. "What's this?" Ethan asked. "A letter for you," I said. He moved to open it, but I pressed his hand down. "Not now." I looked directly into his eyes, my voice calm. "Open it only when the moment comes, when you realize that what you've lost might be far more than what you gained." A flicker of confusion and irritation crossed his eyes, as if he thought I was being dramatic. I said nothing more. I gave one final glance at the office I had visited countless times, then turned and walked out without a trace of hesitation. Behind me, I heard Vivian's mocking laugh. I didn't look back. Outside the building, the sunlight was harsh. I hailed a taxi and gave the driver the address of the airport. As the car merged into the river of traffic, I watched the towering Shuming Technologies building shrink in the rearview mirror until it became nothing more than a tiny, blurry dot. I took out my phone and dialed a number. On the other end, Uncle Lee's steady and respectful voice answered, "Miss, have you decided?" "Yes." I watched the city blur past outside the window, my voice perfectly even. "Activate the Phoenix Project and take care of Cynthia for me. Tell her her mother will come back to get her very soon." "Yes, miss, and your father? I'll explain everything to him myself." After hanging up, I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. "Ethan. Vivian. You think this is a victory? No, this is only the beginning. A prelude to the collapse of an empire, one that I will write with my own hands. And that letter, that is only the title page. I just wonder how long it will take before either of you understands it." During the first week after I left, I learned about the situation at the villa through the reports and photos Uncle Lee sent me every day. He had been the housekeeper assigned by my father, quietly playing the role of a distant relative who worked as a humble gardener for the past 3 years. Ethan had never known that the old man pruning flowers in the garden every day was actually one of the top security chiefs of the Chin Corporation. According to the report, Ethan Gu returned to the villa only once, the night I left. He was probably trying to confirm whether I had really walked away with nothing. When he discovered that I had taken only an old suitcase I used years ago while studying abroad in Paris, and that all the designer bags and jewelry he had given me, along with the Monet water lilies my father anonymously gifted us as a wedding present, were still hanging untouched on the wall, he sneered and said to Vivian when, "See? I told you she's just playing hard to get, trying to make me feel guilty." I could picture exactly the arrogant, self-satisfied expression he wore when he said it. The very next day, Vivian couldn't wait to move in. Acting like the new lady of the house, she began a massive renovation of the villa. In the photos, the serene Chinese-style courtyard I had personally designed was covered with gaudy artificial turf and plastic flamingos. The clean, modern living room had been stuffed with mismatched, over-decorated European carved furniture. What amused me most was that she removed the priceless water lilies from the wall and replaced it with a giant glamour portrait of herself. The Monet, worth millions, was casually rolled up and stuffed into a corner of the storage room. She thought she was erasing my presence. In truth, she was only proving, again and again, with her ignorance and shallowness, that she didn't deserve any of it. What pained me most was my child, Cynthia. Uncle Lee said she had become even quieter than before. She refused to eat anything Vivian made and wouldn't say a single word to her. To win her over, Vivian bought piles of toys, but Cynthia didn't even look at them. One night, Vivian tried to read her a bedtime story. She picked up the French edition of The Little Prince I used to read to her. Stumbling through the text, she misread sheep as goat, interpreted tame as feed, and Cynthia just stared at her coldly. Then, with the clear Parisian accent I had taught her, she said, "S'il vous plaît, tais-toi, tu es trop bruyante. Please be quiet, you're too loud." Vivian's face instantly turned the color of pig liver. She didn't understand the whole sentence, but she recognized the word bruyante, noisy. Furious and humiliated, she wanted to explode, but at that moment Ethan walked in. She immediately switched to her pitiful expression, complaining tearfully that Cynthia didn't respect her. Ethan didn't scold Cynthia. He only rubbed his temples tiredly and said to Vivian, "She's just a kid. Try to be patient." I knew Ethan loved his child, but in his world his career had always come first before everything else, including family. That night, I received a photo forwarded by Uncle Lee. It was Cynthia's bedtime book, The Little Prince, opened to the page where the fox appears. In the upper right corner there was a tiny folded crease. That was a secret sign between Cynthia and me. The fox meant everything was fine, Mom. I'm okay. If it had been the rose, it would have meant trouble. I need you. Seeing the little folded corner allowed me to breathe again. My daughter was stronger and smarter than I had ever imagined. She understood that this separation was temporary. In her own way, she was standing by my side, fighting with me. I told Uncle Lee to relay to Cynthia that her pilot was already on the way back to her, and soon she would leave that boring little planet behind. Putting down my phone, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling window of my apartment in Paris, overlooking the city I had been away from for 3 years. The Seine flowed quietly through the night, and the Eiffel Tower sparkled brilliantly in the distance. My phone vibrated. It was a new email. The subject line read, "Preliminary Analysis Report on Shuming Technology's Core Patent, the Tianshu System, set by the Technical Division of Skylark Capital." I opened the email, and the corner of my lips lifted into a cold smile. "Ethan Gu, the foundation of your empire has already begun to crumble, and I will be the one to bring it down with my own hands. You thought the only thing you abandoned was a wife. Soon, you'll realize that what you abandoned was your entire world. 3 years, more than 1,000 days and nights, are enough for many things to change." For me, these 3 years were a rebirth and a return. I was no longer the blurry shadow following behind Ethan. I had become Claire Chin once again. In Paris, I used decisive, thunderous methods to restructure the investment fund my father had given me to practice with. I transformed it from an obscure regional institution into a force that swept across the European tech industry, Skylark Capital. Its name came from my father, Charles Chin. It was my ambition and my declaration to the world. I, Claire Chin, will inherit and surpass everything my father built. For Ethan, however, these 3 years seemed to be the peak of his life. With help from Vivian's father and funding from Starcrest Technologies, Shuming Technologies went public. Its stock soared, and he instantly became the rising star of the country's tech world, appearing on the covers of countless business magazines. His love story with Vivian was packaged by the media into a glossy tale, a domineering CEO and the loyal woman who stood by him. And I, the real wife he once vowed to love, had been silently erased from the narrative. Vivian had become the woman who built everything with him from nothing. I scrolled through the domestic news. In the photos, Ethan looked proud and confident, while Vivian clung to his arm with a demure smile. The massive diamond ring on her hand sparkled under the cameras. My heart remained utterly still. If anything, I wanted to laugh. The shining tower beneath their feet, the seemingly stable business empire, had a load-bearing pillar at its core, the Tianshu operating system. And from the very beginning, buried deep inside it, was a time bomb I personally placed. The moment had finally arrived. "Miss Chin, everything is ready," my chief strategy officer, a meticulous German man, reported to me. "We have quietly acquired all commercial patents for the German open-source code used in the foundational architecture of the Tianshu system through our offshore subsidiaries." "Good." I nodded. "Initiate Phase 2. Submit the patent infringement complaint against Shuming Technologies to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office." "Understood. And one more thing," I added. "Spread the word in the market. Skylark Capital is preparing to expand into China. Say that our primary targets are high-potential companies in renewable energy and AI tech." This would allow him, Ethan Gu, to see a faint illusion of hope while he stood besieged on all sides. I lifted my coffee and looked out toward the financial district. When a drowning man is desperate, he will cling to anything that floats, even if that final strand of hope is the very straw that breaks him. Unsurprisingly, within a week, the global tech world was in turmoil. The core product of Shuming Technologies was banned from the U.S. market due to severe patent infringement. Like the first domino falling, European partners terminated their collaborations. Domestic supply chains began to shake as well. Within 3 days, Shuming's stock price plunged 40%. Nearly $100 billion in market value evaporated overnight. On television, Ethan appeared before reporters, disheveled and exhausted, his eyes bloodshot. He promised the public that he would resolve the patent issue as soon as possible. But everyone could see it clearly. The empire he built was collapsing. At that moment, another piece of news took up an even larger headline across major financial media. Mysterious giant Skylark Capital enters China with tens of billions, aiming to reshape the tech landscape. I looked at the article and knew instantly Ethan Gu would come looking for me, because Skylark Capital's arrival was the only lifeline he could see right now. The office phone rang. "Miss Chin, we've received a funding roadshow request from Shuming Technologies. Their CEO, Mr. Ethan Gu, hopes to introduce their project to you in person." Leaning back in my chair, I twirled my fountain pen between my fingers and said calmly, "A approve it. Schedule the meeting for next Wednesday. At our Shanghai headquarters, I'm very much looking forward to meeting Mr. Gu. After hanging up, my gaze shifted to the French edition of The Count of Monte Cristo on my desk. On the flyleaf was a line I had once written by hand. I waited. I hoped. I took my revenge. Now it was time for my own Edmond Dantes to see with his own eyes exactly what kind of person he had thrown into the Chateau d'If years ago. Skylark Capital's China headquarters, located on the Bund in Shanghai, occupied 3 entire floors. Outside the vast floor-to-ceiling windows flowed the shimmering Huangpu River, with the brilliant Oriental Pearl Tower rising across the water. I sat at the head seat of the largest conference room. Across the massive screen in front of me, Shuming Technologies' stock chart glowed in a sea of brutal, devastating red. My assistant leaned toward me and whispered, "Miss Chin, Mr. Gu and his team have arrived. They're waiting in the reception room." "Let them wait 10 more minutes," I said without lifting my eyes from the screen. "Let the market ferment a little longer. I want every nerve in his body stretched to its breaking point." 10 minutes later, the door to the conference room opened. Ethan Gu walked in with his core team behind him. After 3 years, he looked noticeably thinner. The youthful confidence he once carried had been replaced by exhaustion and anxiety. His suit hung a bit loose on him, clearly a recent consequence of stress-induced weight loss. His gaze swept the room before finally landing on the figure seated at the main position, my back still to him. Several senior executives of Skylark Capital were present, blonde-haired, blue-eyed foreign veterans of the industry. The lineup alone must have pressed heavily on him. He inhaled deeply, trying to steady himself as he began. "Good afternoon, esteemed investors. I am Ethan Gu, founder and CEO of Shuming Technologies." He launched into his pitch, using every ounce of skill he had, painting a picture of a company temporarily hindered but full of promise. He spoke of their technology, their market, their team. His voice carried a desperate sort of passion, like a man wagering his life on one final bet. I didn't interrupt, I simply listened. His slides were polished, beautifully designed. But every number, every model was, to me, no different from a child's sandcastle, pretty, but destined to collapse at the slightest wave. After 15 minutes, he finally finished. A thin sheen of sweat covered his forehead. He looked toward the head of the table, anticipation and anxiety warring in his eyes, waiting for the judgment of the mysterious CEO with the legendary background. The conference room went eerily silent. I slowly turned my chair. It was an ergonomic Herman Miller, the kind that rotated without a single sound, yet carried an invisible force of authority. And when my face finally emerged under the bright conference room lights, I saw Ethan Gu's expression with perfect clarity. It was a mixture of shock, disbelief, dread, and even a trace of fear. His pupils widened instantly, his lips parted slightly, as if someone had seized him by the throat and he couldn't force out a single word. His team behind him froze just as completely. I was dressed in a cleanly tailored white Chanel suit, my long hair swept into a neat, efficient style. My makeup was precise and cold. My eyes were calm, unruffled, as if I were looking at a stranger who had absolutely nothing to do with me. "Bonsoir, Monsieur Gu," I said softly, in flawless French with a faint Parisian accent. Then, watching the color drain further from his face, I switched back to the language we both knew well. The corner of my lips lifted into the faintest curl. "Long time no see, Mr. Gu." "Claire? Chin?" His voice came out dry and hoarse, trembling with disbelief. I gave the slightest nod, then shifted my gaze to the screen behind him. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried clearly to every corner of the conference room. "Shall we begin the Q&A session? I'd like to ask the first question." I looked straight at him, then at the rattled executives behind him, and spoke each word distinctly. "Mr. Gu, your business model is full of holes." In that instant, I watched the last flicker of defiance in his eyes finally extinguish. What replaced it was sheer panic, bottomless, suffocating regret. I knew that this hunt, 3 years in the making, had only just entered its most thrilling stage. Full of holes? His chief technology officer, one of his earliest partners, a veteran who had been with him since the beginning, clearly couldn't accept it. He mustered his courage and protested. "Miss Chin, isn't that conclusion far too hasty? Our Tianshu system has undergone thousands of tests, Market feedback has always been excellent. I didn't look at him. My eyes remained locked on Ethan's ashen face. Is that so? I let out a quiet laugh, picked up the laser pointer, and aimed it at the system architecture diagram he was so proud of. Then, please explain why your user data collection protocol bypasses local encryption and uploads directly to your cloud servers. Is it for the convenience of big data analysis? Or is it for selling user data to third parties? The CTO's face went pale in an instant. That was an unspoken secret in the industry, a shortcut took to monetize data more quickly. And I continued before he could recover, moving the laser pointer to the financial statements. Your Q3 report shows R&D investment at an impressive 28%. But why was more than 60% of that funding funneled into an offshore company in the Cayman Islands called Vanya Holdings? As far as I know, that company has no actual research operations. I turned back to Ethan. Mr. Gu, would you like to tell me what that money was really used for? Ethan's body began to tremble faintly. Vanya Holdings was Vivian's private company, the shell he used to transfer assets and avoid taxes. It was buried extremely deep. He had never imagined anyone would uncover it. Lastly, let's talk about technology. My tone remained calm, but each word was sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, slicing precisely at the most vital point. Your Tianshu system claims to be fully self-developed, yet its core logic relies heavily on a set of open-source algorithms released in 2015 by the German FIMO laboratory. And as of 1 month ago, the full commercial rights to those algorithms were acquired entirely by Skylark Capital. Meaning, I paused, looking at Ethan's lips, now completely drained of color, and delivered the final verdict. Legally speaking, every product your company has manufactured since 1 month ago is illegal. The commercial empire you're so proud of is nothing more than an unauthorized structure built on sand. With a soft click, I set the laser pointer down on the table. The entire conference room fell into a deathly silence. Ethan Gu's team all looked ashen, unable to utter a single word. The way they looked at me, it was as if they were staring at a demon. As for Ethan, he just stared at me, his eyes bloodshot, filled with a regret and desperation so intense it looked like it might spill over. Why? He finally forced out that single word through clenched teeth. This is the Q&A session, Mr. Gu. I leaned back in my chair, fingers interlaced, my posture calm and composed. I will only answer questions related to this investment. As for personal grudges, I don't think there's anything left for us to discuss. I need an explanation. His voice cracked into a guttural snarl, completely losing control. An explanation? I laughed, a soft sound, but cold and laced with endless mockery. 3 years ago, when you threw me out like trash, did you give me an explanation? When you forced me to sign that agreement for Vivian Wen's sake, did you think about this day ever coming? Ethan Gu, your biggest flaw isn't stupidity, it's arrogance. You're so arrogant you believe the world you see is the only truth. You never once considered what exactly you were throwing away. I stood up, looking down at him from above. This meeting is over, I said calmly, and my conclusion is that Skylark Capital will not invest in Zhuming Technologies. As for your company's future, I walked to his side, leaned down, and whispered in his ear, quietly enough that only the two of us could hear. I will buy all of it, every last piece, for $1, and you, along with your Vivian, will pay the price. Then I straightened, turned, and walked out of the conference room without giving him another glance. Behind me, I could hear his ragged breaths, heavy with suppressed despair and fury. I knew his psychological defenses had completely collapsed. Now it was time to pull the rug out from under him. What happened in the conference room was only the appetizer. The real finishing blow was the piece of information I had accidentally allowed to leak to the media, my true identity. After leaving Skylark Capital, Ethan spiraled into madness. He used every connection, every resource he had left, to investigate where I had been these past 3 years, and how I had become this woman, this Miss Chin, who terrified him. He thought it would be a long and difficult investigation. But he was wrong. I had already paved a perfectly smooth road leading him straight to the truth. Everything he wanted to know was exactly what I wanted him to know. 3 days later, a detailed background report was placed on his desk. I could imagine the changes on his face as he read it night after night, from confusion to shock to utter despair as all color drained from his face, and finally to a hopelessness so deep it hollowed out his soul. The first page was my ID photo, with my full legal name beneath it, Claire Chin. The second page contained my family information: father, Charles Chin; mother, Margaret Shen. Those two names were enough to shake anyone who had ever stepped foot in the Chinese business world. Charles Chin, Forbes China's richest man for 10 consecutive years, the legendary figure said to control half of the country's economic lifelines, and the report stated plainly, Claire Chin is Charles Chin's only, and also his most beloved daughter. The third page detailed my educational background: the Sorbonne, Paris, dual degrees in art history and business management. Below it was a graduation photo of me in my cap and gown, beaming brightly. Standing beside me, personally adjusting my tassel, was the distinguished, silver-haired university president, an academic giant revered throughout Europe. The fourth page introduced Skylark Capital. According to the report, Skylark Capital was originally a small European investment fund, split off from Chin Corporation, meant as a training ground for the heiress. No one had expected that this toy would, in just 3 years, be transformed by that very heiress into a monstrous force capable of stirring storms in the international capital markets. At the end of the report was a photograph. It was taken at a charity gala I attended in Paris 3 years ago, after leaving him. In the picture, I wore an elegant evening gown and was conversing and laughing with the President of France. Bang! A deafening crash echoed through the office as Ethan Gu slammed his fist onto his expensive rosewood desk, cracking it open. His eyes were bloodshot, like a wild beast trapped in a cage, as he swept every document off the desk in a frenzy. Daughter of Charles Chin, Skylark Capital. He muttered the words, each one landing like a sledgehammer against his heart. And finally, he understood. He understood why a he thought had no background carried a natural grace and nobility that even someone like Vivian Wen, raised in high society, could never match. He understood why everything I cooked, the tea I brewed, the way I spoke about art, carried a level of taste that he could never comprehend, a refinement belonging to the true upper echelons of society. He understood why, every time his company faced a crisis, a perfect opportunity somehow appeared just in time. Those lucky breaks he thought he had seized on his own were merely paths I had quietly paved for him with the lift of a finger. He had believed he married a Cinderella who needed his rescue. He never knew he had married the true princess of this entire country. And for the sake of a second-rate businessman's daughter, Vivian Wen, for the sake of a trivial investment, he had personally driven that princess out of his home. He had tossed away the greatest treasure in the world as if it were a pebble by the roadside, only to proudly pick up a piece of worthless glass. A raw, guttural scream tore out of him, pure agony. Regret consumed him, shredding what remained of his sanity. Then he suddenly remembered the envelope I left behind 3 years ago, the one with the hand-drawn sycamore leaf, the one he had dismissed without even opening. He staggered toward his safe like a madman, typing the password with trembling fingers. From the very bottom shelf, he pulled out the envelope he had forgotten for 3 years. He knew the final answer was inside, the answer to just how blind, how foolish he had been. The paper had yellowed slightly, but the hand-drawn sycamore leaf remained as clear as ever. His hands shook as he tore it open. Inside was a neatly folded sheet of stationery. On it, written in exquisite cursive French, each letter formed with calm, elegant precision, just like the signature I had written the night he forced me to sign my name. He couldn't understand a single word. The letter, just like Claire Chin herself, belonged to a world he had never been able to step into, a world too distant, too refined, too far above him. He grabbed his phone. With a hoarse, breaking voice, he roared at his most trusted assistant, "Find me the best French translator in all of Shanghai. Now. Immediately." Half an hour later, a middle-aged man wearing gold-rimmed glasses, gentle and scholarly in manner, was brought into his office. The man was a professor from the Shanghai Institute of Foreign Languages, specializing in French literature. When he saw the contents of the letter, a flicker of surprise passed through his eyes. The writer of the letter possessed not only an exceptionally deep mastery of French, but also an astonishing understanding of French culture and literature. This wasn't just a letter. It was practically a prose poem filled with layered metaphors. "A remarkable piece," the professor murmured. "Cut the nonsense. Read it to me." Ethan's patience had already evaporated. The professor cleared his throat and began translating, word by word, into Chinese, delivering to him the judgment that had arrived 3 years late. "My dear Ethan, by the time you read this letter, I imagine you're already standing on the edge of the cliff you built with your own hands. For 3 years, I walked into your world like a stranger from a foreign land, trying to learn your language, adapt to your rules, even naively believing that if I worked hard enough you would one day see the true shape of my soul. But I was wrong. You never intended to know me. You were only admiring the reflection you imagined, one that fit every need and fantasy you ever had. You loved my obedience, never realizing it was the last shred of respect I offered love, after lowering my pride. You valued my sensibility, never knowing it was my silent mockery after seeing through every calculation you made. You couldn't read the original editions on my bookshelf, nor understand the songs I hummed from time to time. You never knew the painting hanging in our living room was worth enough to buy 10 of your companies. You always said I was good for nothing except housework. But you never knew that the core prototype of your precious Tianshu project was nothing more than a science innovation assignment I casually wrote at age 18 during a summer program at MIT. I left it for you on page 198 of The Moon and Sixpence, in the study. I once planned to give it to you as a surprise during your company's darkest hour, to tell you that your wife could fight beside you too. Now I think it no longer needs to be a surprise. It will serve instead as the grandest epitaph, one that buries you in your ridiculous love. Goodbye, Ethan Gu. Not forever. Written by Claire Chin on the night you first brought Vivian home. When the translation ended, the entire office fell into a suffocating silence. The professor looked at Ethan's completely bloodless, corpse-like face, then quietly excused himself. Ethan stood rigidly in place. The words of the letter echoed in his mind like a vicious curse, replaying over and over. Page 198. The Moon and Sixpence. Like a puppet yanked by invisible strings, he stumbled desperately toward home, crashing into the study he hadn't entered once in the past 3 years. Everything inside remained exactly as it had been when I left. His hands trembled as he pulled the book from the shelf, frantically flipping to page 198. A slightly yellowed sheet of A4 paper slipped out from between the pages. It was covered in dense formulas, logic diagrams, and code structures he couldn't understand. At the bottom of the page, in neat, elegant English handwriting, was a notation, a preliminary draft for a decentralized operating system, signed by Chin. The date on the paper was from the early days of his startup, the winter when his company was on the brink of bankruptcy. At that moment, Ethan Gu could no longer hold himself up. His legs gave out, and he collapsed to the floor. Clutching that sheet of paper, he cried out, like a child, an anguished, broken wail drenched in utter despair. He finally understood. He hadn't lost just a wife. He hadn't lost just a wealthy father-in-law. He had lost the only person who truly saw every corner of his ambition and had the ability to help him achieve it. He had lost his soulmate. He had personally pushed his own goddess off her pedestal. While Ethan was being devoured by regret and despair, I was in my Shanghai apartment, enjoying a rare moment of calm. My attorney had just left, bringing me the gift I wanted most, a brand new French edition of The Little Prince. I opened it carefully. Familiar illustrations and beautiful lines met my eyes. This book was the secret telegraph machine between me and my child Cynthia. We had a rule. Every month, the attorney would deliver her a new copy of The Little Prince. If she was safe and well, she would fold a corner on the chapter where the fox appears. If she felt threatened or distressed by Vivian again, she would fold the corner on the chapter where the rose appears. And I would use the same system in the books I sent her. A fox meant, Mommy is fine, and the plan is going smoothly. A rose meant, Mommy ran into a problem, but it'll be solved soon. Over the past 3 years, the fox folds far outnumbered the roses. I opened the copy my attorney had brought, turning straight to the chapter about that proud, vain rose. In the upper right corner, there was a crisp, repeatedly pressed crease. My heart sank slightly. Vivian was starting to lose control. I immediately called Uncle Lee. Uncle Lee, did something happen at the villa? His tone was grave. Miss, you are frighteningly perceptive. Ever since Mr. Goo's company ran into trouble, Vivian has become hysterical. She vents all her anger on the young miss. She hasn't laid hands on her, but she insults her constantly and subjects her to emotional abuse. The day before yesterday, she even locked her in her room for an entire day without food. My eyes went cold. My knuckles whitened as I gripped my phone. And Ethan? What is he doing? Mr. Goo hasn't been home for days. He's drowning in chaos. He doesn't have the capacity to care about anything at home. I understand, I said quietly. The last trace of hesitation in my heart evaporated completely. My original plan had been methodical. Destroy Ethan's company step by step, force him into total financial ruin, then reclaim Cynthia's custody through legal channels. But now I had changed my mind. I would not let my child spend one more day beside that woman. I walked to my desk and picked up a new copy of The Little Prince. Carefully, I turned to the page where the pilot meets the little prince in the desert and folded the corner with solemn precision. This was our third code. The appearance of the pilot meant, Cynthia, get ready. Mom is coming to take you home. I handed the book to my attorney and instructed, make sure this reaches Cynthia today. No exceptions. After that, I dialed my chief legal officer. Anna, activate our highest level emergency protocol. I need, within 24 hours, a full psychological evaluation report issued by the most reputable child psychiatrist in the country regarding Cynthia Goo. A complete evaluation of Cynthia Goo's current psychological health. At the same time, gather every piece of evidence from the past 3 years showing Vivian's abuse or disguised abuse of Cynthia, including but not limited to surveillance footage, recordings from household staff, and Cynthia's journals. Finally, file for an emergency child protection order under Skylark Capital's name, and simultaneously submit the petition for custody modification. I want everyone to know, I said, my voice cold and steady, that Ethan Goo and Vivian Wen are not just failures in business. They are unfit, negligent people who should never have been parents in the first place. On the other end of the phone, Anna replied briskly, Understood, Miss Chin, consider it done. After hanging up, I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. A storm was coming. Dark clouds pressed heavily over the entire city, casting everything in a suffocating shade of gray. A larger tempest was on its way, and I would be the eye of that storm. Vivian Wen, Ethan Goo, your biggest mistake was touching my bottom line, and my child is my only bottom line in this world. While Ethan struggled on the edge of collapse, desperately trying to salvage the situation, begging everyone he could find, even attempting to contact my father's assistant, every attempt to reach me was turned away at the door. Vivian, after a brief moment of panic, shifted all her hopes onto a laughable fantasy. She believed that if she could help Ethan survive this crisis, her position as Mrs. Goo would finally be secured. Her stupidity and greed were the most important pieces in my entire plan. Uncle Lee sent me new information. Vivian had been secretly contacting one of my former household assistants, Chen, from the days I lived in the villa. Chen was someone I personally promoted, but I'd always known he came from a poor family and had a seriously ill mother. His hunger for money was stronger than most. When I left 3 years ago, I deliberately didn't take him with me, because I needed him to be a chess piece for today's situation. I instructed Uncle Lee to release a rumor that I was developing a brand new operating system capable of replacing Tianshu entirely, and that it was already in its final testing stage. That rumor was the perfect bait, and it landed precisely where I wanted it to. As expected, Vivian immediately contacted Chen. She offered him 1 million in cash and an apartment in downtown Shanghai in exchange for stealing the critical code from me. Chen hesitated, but eventually, painfully, agreed. Everything was playing out exactly as written in my script. Through Chen, I delivered a heavily encrypted file to Vivian, one I had prepared long ago. The file appeared to contain a flawless, fully functional operating system. In reality, it was a Trojan horse. The moment it was run on any device, I would be able to take full remote control of that device from thousands of miles away. Vivian treated the file as if it were a priceless treasure. But instead of handing it over to Ethan immediately, she held on to it. She first contacted Shuming Technology's biggest competitor, Voyant Tech, trying to sell the code for a higher price. That entire scene was captured in full by a microcamera carried by a commercial spy I had planted inside Voyant Tech. Only after Voyant Tech rejected her, which I had also arranged in advance, did Vivian reluctantly deliver her lifeline to the already cornered Ethan. "Ethan, look," she said excitedly. "This is what I managed to get, Claire Chin's newest research. With this, we can escape the patent restrictions and rise again." She looked up at him like a child waiting to be praised, eager and triumphant. And Ethan Gu. This man, once razor-sharp and brilliant, had, under crushing pressure and regret, already lost his most basic sense of judgment. Like a drowning man spotting a piece of driftwood, he grabbed onto it with everything he had. He immediately summoned the company's top technical team and ordered them to analyze the code overnight. "Chairman Gu, this is perfect," his chief engineer reported excitedly. "The architecture of this code is at least 5 years ahead of the Tianshu system. This is genius-level design." For the first time in weeks, Ethan Gu saw a glimmer of light in his darkness. He decided to burn the ships behind him to wager the company's entire future. He would hold a massive product launch and announce to the world that Shuming Technologies was returning with revolutionary new technology. The launch date was set for 3 days later. I received the invitation soon after. Ethan had personally sent someone to deliver it. Attached was a handwritten note. "Claire, please come." His intention couldn't have been clearer. He wanted to prove to me that he hadn't lost yet. He wanted one spectacular comeback. One last, desperate attempt to salvage his shattered dignity. I picked up the invitation, and the corner of my mouth lifted in a cold smile. Of course I would go. How could I possibly miss the closing act of this magnificent show, the moment an entire empire collapsed in my hands? I had even already decided what expression I would wear when the event was over, and how I would say, "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Gu. The fireworks were beautiful." Shuming Technologies' new product launch was held at the most prestigious exhibition center in Shanghai. The scale was unprecedented. Ethan invited nearly every major tech media outlet and investment institution in the country. He wanted the whole world to witness his grand return. By the time I arrived, the event had already begun. Ethan stood at the center of the stage, wearing a freshly tailored suit, his hair meticulously styled. Forcing himself to stay composed, he painted his grand vision to the crowd. Behind him, a massive LED screen flashed dazzling animations. I didn't alert anyone. I simply found an inconspicuous seat in the last row and sat down quietly. The moment of miracle was about to arrive. Ethan's voice trembled slightly from excitement as he raised the remote in his hand and pressed the activation button. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the future of Shuming Technologies, the quantum core system." As soon as he finished speaking, the spotlights converged on the central screen. The audience collectively held their breath, waiting for the revolutionary moment. The screen began displaying streams of complex code, sleek, futuristic. But the next second, a sharp electronic crack tore through the speakers. The code froze, then instantly collapsed into a chaotic swarm of corrupted characters. The characters surged together, merging into a massive, blood-red skull icon. Then, through the hall's state-of-the-art sound system, a cold, emotionless synthetic voice echoed across the entire venue. "Trojan program activated. System super administrative access acquired. Access acquisition complete. Beginning playback of gift." Gasps erupted across the hall. The color drained from Ethan Gu's face in an instant. Terrified, he stabbed at the remote control again and again, but it did nothing. Backstage, the technical team scrambled in panic, only to discover, in horror, that the entire venue's playback system had been completely taken over. The giant skull icon vanished from the screen, replaced by a crystal-clear video. The footage was taken in a private booth of a cafe. Its protagonist was none other than Vivian Wen. "Mr. Wang, rest assured," Vivian said smugly. "This code is definitely Claire Chin's newest work. As long as you pay 50 million, I promise Ethan will never find out." Her voice echoed through the massive hall, sharp, arrogant, unmistakable. In the video, she was sitting across from the CEO of Voyant Tech, Shuming Technology's biggest rival, conducting a dirty backdoor transaction. And that was only the beginning. As soon as the video ended, an audio recording began to play. Vivian's hysterical voice filled the hall. The background was clearly inside the Gu family villa. "Cynthia Gu, you little bastard, just like your mother, ungrateful trash. You think she's coming back for you? Keep dreaming. She abandoned you long ago. And if you dare refuse to eat again, I'll lock you in the dark room where you'll never see the sun." Curses, threats, cruelty laid bare, broadcast under the blinding flashes of every major media outlet. The journalists went insane. Like sharks smelling blood, they whipped their cameras toward the man on stage, a man who was already frozen, stiff, dead pale. "Mr. Gu, is the video and audio authentic? Did your company's core technology come from stealing Skylark Capital's work? Were you aware that Miss Wen abused your child?" One sharp question after another sliced into Ethan Gu, nailing him to the pillar of public shame. I sat in the back row, quietly watching it all. Watching the man who once acted invincible being stripped of every layer of pretense, left with nothing but the most wretched, humiliating version of himself. His empire did not rise triumphantly as he had dreamed. Instead, it collapsed publicly, in the most spectacular execution imaginable, crumbling into nothing but rubble. I stood, smoothed the hem of my white suit jacket, and slipped out of that circus of a venue without making a sound. Outside, the sky at some unknowable moment had already cleared. The sunlight was warm. Beautiful. Backstage, however, had descended into pure hell. Ethan stumbled off stage like a ghost and lunged at Vivian, who was trying to escape through the back door. He grabbed her hair and yanked hard. "You bitch." His eyes were blood red, wild like an animal driven to a dead end. With all his strength, he slammed her onto the ground. "It's you. You ruined me." Vivian hit the floor so hard she saw stars, her head cracking against the ground, blood trickling down her forehead. Her mask shattered completely. She shrieked like a rabid animal. "How dare you blame me, Ethan? If you weren't useless, your company wouldn't be in ruins. I got that code for you. Who the hell do you think it was for? For you, you pathetic loser." "Loser," Ethan laughed, a laugh more painful than crying. "You have no idea. The code you stole, Claire planted it on purpose, you idiot. You handed her the knife, then helped her stab me with it." "A trap?" Vivian froze for a second, then burst into even more maniacal laughter. "Ha ha! So what if it was a trap? Ethan, you still don't get it, do you? Your biggest mistake wasn't marrying me, it was sending Claire Chin away." She dragged herself up, trembling, and jabbed a finger at his face, spitting out each word like venom. "You think I love you?" "I never loved you," Vivian spat. "I only loved the title of Mrs. Gu. I loved your money. And you, because of my pathetic little background, you shoved away a real mountain of gold. You don't even know who Claire Chin is, do you? She's the daughter of Charles Chin, the heiress to the richest family in the country. If you had treated her even a little better, there would have been nothing you couldn't have. But you, what did you treat her as? A maid, a decorative vase. You didn't even know which university she graduated from. You couldn't even read the letter she left you. Ethan Gu, I didn't ruin you. Your own stupidity and arrogance did. You are the real idiot, the biggest joke of all." Each of her words was a poisoned dagger, stabbing straight into Ethan's heart. He stood frozen, every ounce of strength drained from his body. So everyone had seen the truth clearly. Everyone but him. He had thought he was the mastermind behind the chessboard, never realizing he had been the most pathetic, laughable chess piece on someone else's board from beginning to end. The backstage door burst open. A group of uniformed police officers stepped inside. "Mr. Gu, Miss Wen." The lead officer displayed his badge, voice cold and firm. "We received reports. You are suspected of commercial espionage, patent fraud, and multiple counts of child abuse. Please come with us." Cold metal handcuffs snapped onto their wrists. Vivian thrashed wildly and screamed curses. But Ethan was like a puppet with its strings severed, soulless, offering no resistance as the officers escorted him away. As they passed the backstage exit, he saw me. I was standing there quietly, watching him. Our eyes met in midair. There was no more hatred in his gaze. No anger. Only a boundless sorrow, so deep it looked like begging. He opened his mouth, trying to say something. I simply looked away, as if he were nothing more than a stranger passing by. As we brushed past each other, I heard him whisper, in a breath so faint it barely existed. "Why, didn't you tell me earlier?" I didn't turn back. I didn't answer. Because I knew he would never understand. Even if I had told him earlier, he wouldn't have believed me. In his world, he only believed what he wanted to believe. And I had long ceased to be a part of his world. The next day, Skylark Capital held a press conference. As CEO, I formally announced that we would be acquiring Shuming Technologies in full, symbolically, for the price of $1, due to its severe financial and legal crisis. At the same time, I announced that Skylark Capital's legal department would fully cooperate with authorities in investigating all charges against Ethan Gu and Vivian Wen, providing every necessary piece of evidence. This meant one thing: I wasn't just taking his company. I was sending him to prison with my own hands. Halfway through the press conference, the doors were pushed open as a crowd of reporters swarmed in, and then Ethan appeared at the entrance. He must have been bailed out. But in just one night, he had aged a decade. His temples were streaked with white, his face sunken, his once tailored suit now wrinkled and ill-fitting. His eyes were hollow, like a walking corpse. Pushing past the reporters, he staggered toward me. The flash guns exploded in blinding bursts. The room fell silent with anticipation, everyone waiting for the final climax of this saga. He stopped in front of the podium, just one table separating us, and looked at me with a gaze deeper than any I had ever seen from him. And then, to the shock of the entire room, he dropped to his knees with a heavy thud. "Claire?" He looked up at me, his voice hoarse, trembling with endless regret. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I just beg you, for Cynthia's sake, give me one more chance. The company, I don't need it. I don't need anything. I just want to start over." He cried. A man who once strutted with arrogance, now sobbing like a helpless child at my feet. The reporters were stunned silent. Then the shutters erupted in a storm of frantic clicks. I looked at him calmly, expressionless. Inside me, there wasn't even a ripple. Too late. Once trust and love have been crushed completely, every tear, every apology is cheap and ridiculous. I picked up the microphone. My voice echoed crisply through the speakers. "Mr. Gu," I said, "I think you need to understand two things. First," I looked directly at his pleading, ruined face. "My child will soon no longer carry the surname Gu. Her custody, and every right she has in her future, will have nothing to do with you ever again. Second," my voice turned cold, devoid of warmth, "your chance ended the moment you forced me to sign that divorce agreement 3 years ago. So put away your pitiful performance. Between us, aside from legal procedures, nothing remains." I set the microphone down. "Security," I told my assistant, "please remove this man. We still have a press conference to continue." Several tall security guards immediately stepped forward and lifted Ethan, who had already lost all strength, dragging him out like a lifeless dog. As I watched his desperate silhouette being pulled away, one thought surfaced in my mind. This 3-year reckoning finally reached its curtain call. And it was time for me to bring my little prince home. When the press conference ended, I went straight to the detention center where Vivian Wen was being held to process Cynthia's temporary guardianship transfer. With the emergency protection order and undeniable evidence of abuse, everything went smoothly. Through the glass, I saw a small figure in a tiny suit, backpack on his shoulders, walking out hand in hand with a staff member. My eyes stung. 3 years. My Cynthia had grown taller and thinner. The baby fat on her cheeks had faded, revealing a defined jawline. Her features looked more and more like mine. But in her eyes, those eyes that should have held innocence, there was a quiet, heavy calmness far too mature for a child her age. "Cynthia," I whispered. She lifted her head, and the instant she saw me, light finally returned to her gaze. She didn't cry or throw herself at me like other children might. Instead, she took quick, determined steps toward me, wrapped her small arms around my leg, and pressed her face against my suit trousers. I felt her tiny body trembling. My heart clenched painfully, stealing my breath away. I knelt and pulled her into my arms, whispering softly into her ear in French. "Mon petit prince. Maman est là. On rentre à la maison." "My little prince, mommy is here. Let's go home." She didn't speak, just nodded fiercely against my shoulder. Just as I was about to take her away, a disheveled, desperate silhouette rushed toward us, blocking our path. Ethan Gu. Somehow, by some method I could not begin to guess, he had managed to get here in time. Cynthia looked at him, at the man who was supposed to be her father, her eyes filled with something complicated. There was guilt there, regret, and a faint, desperate longing. He tried to reach out to her. "Cynthia, sweetheart. Daddy's here to take you home." Cynthia's small body stiffened instantly. She lifted her head from my shoulder and looked at him. This father in name only, there was no warmth, no closeness. Only a distant, icy indifference, like a child staring at a stranger 1,000 miles away. "You're not my dad." Her young, crisp voice echoed through the spacious hall, each word slapping across Ethan Gu's face like a brutal strike. He froze. His outstretched hands stiffened awkwardly in midair. Cynthia stepped behind me, only her small head peeking out as she looked at him again. Her tone was unnaturally calm for a child her age. "You let that woman yell at me, call me names, and not give me food. You made my mom leave. You never read me a bedtime story. You never came to a single school meeting. You only remembered you had a daughter when you were drunk." She paused, gathered all the strength in her tiny body, and delivered the final cruel verdict. "You don't deserve to be my dad." And with that, she grabbed my hand and walked forward without a single backward glance. Ethan turned to stone. He had survived being abandoned by investors. He had endured being betrayed by the woman he trusted. He had suffered the humiliation of becoming the laughingstock of the entire industry. But being rejected, completely, brutally, by his own child, stripped him of the last piece of pride he had left. This was the final blow that crushed him. I held Cynthia's small hand as we walked toward the sunlight outside the doors. I didn't look back, but I could feel it, that gaze glued to my back, shifting from unwillingness to regret to final, hollow despair. Some wounds once inflicted can never be repaired. Some roles, once lost, can never be regained. Ethan Gu, you finally have nothing left. At the private airport's tarmac, the silver fuselage of TQ Capital's Gulfstream G650 gleamed under the sun. Holding Cynthia's hand, I was just about to step onto the boarding stairs when a hoarse, desperate scream tore through the air. "Claire Chin." I stopped and turned. It was Ethan. I had no idea how he managed to slip away from police custody, but he was charging toward me like a madman, only to be slammed to the ground by two of my security guards in black suits. He flailed helplessly like a fish out of water. His suit was torn, hair disheveled, his face streaked with tears and dirt. There was nothing left of the handsome, confident man he once was. "Why?" he screamed from several yards away, pouring the last of his strength into every word. "Why didn't you tell me who you were? You could have told me. You could have made everything easier. We could have been the strongest couple in the country. Why did you just watch me walk into this disaster? When did you start hating me?" His accusations dripped with resentment and bitterness. Even now, after everything, he still didn't understand. He never reflected on his arrogance, his selfishness, his cruelty. Instead, he blamed me for not revealing my identity to him sooner, as if I owed him the trump card of being the daughter of the richest man in the country. I stared at him. Suddenly, all of it just felt absurd. Slowly, I lifted my hand, I removed my sunglasses, revealing the eyes he once praised. "Clear as water," he used to say. The sunlight fell across my face as I looked down at the man collapsed on the ground, disheveled and defeated. My lips curved slightly. I didn't make a single sound. I only moved my lips, slow, clear, deliberate, answering the last question he would ever have the right to ask me. "From the very beginning. From the moment you treated me like someone without thoughts of her own, a decorative accessory you could shape however you pleased. From the moment you took everything I gave you as something you deserved. From the moment you turned my love into a tool you could use to your advantage. That's when I knew we would never have a future." Ethan Gu understood my lips perfectly. His entire body jolted violently. All the shouting, all the struggling, stopped instantly. It was as if someone had drained every last drop of life from him. He collapsed weakly onto the ground, eyes empty, hollow, consumed by despair. He finally understood. The marriage he had been so proud of had always been a one-man performance he wrote, directed, and acted in alone. The love he thought we shared had been nothing more than a long, silent judgment I had rendered upon him. I put my sunglasses back on, concealing the final trace of emotion in my eyes. Then I turned away, took Cynthia's hand, and walked up the steps of the plane, step by steady step, toward home. Mommy, where are we going? Cynthia looked up with her small, earnest face. I lowered my head and smiled softly at her. We're going to our real home, I told her. Where your grandparents love you, where there's a garden and a castle that belong to you. I paused for a moment. And most importantly, there will be no more lies and no more bad people. The plane taxied along the runway, then roared upward into the sky. Through the window, I took one final look at the land I had lived in for 3 long years, and at the tiny black speck of a man left behind on the tarmac. Goodbye, Ethan Goo. Goodbye to the foolish gamble I once called love, a gamble that cost 3 years of my life. From this moment on, there will be no more fog in the life of Claire Chin. Only open skies, bright, boundless, and entirely my own. What do you think is the hardest part of leaving a toxic relationship? Love and Lies story.